there's a massive gap between clubs who think they do analytics and clubs who actually do use kind of analytical thinking in their decision-making processes. You might be the best scout in the world, you might be the best analyst in the world, but if you just keep that information in your head or you only ever write it on job applications, you're not going to get a job. And we take a basket of metrics that correlate with that style of play. We then apply that across the whole of football. So some clubs who are the kind of what I call the smart clubs are thinking about these opportunities all the time. Others, for lack of resources or lack of that way of thinking, just wait to see what happens. I question whether the market is big enough. I question whether there's enough clubs who will use a service or will use an additional software product that doesn't offer them anything particularly different to what they have. Building your own data sets, that's probably a niche that more people should look at. Of the 20 we bring over, one can be a £10 million asset. And the other ones who you sign and fail will probably only cost you a couple of years of a first-year scholar type wage. To me, that is a bet I'd be making all the time. I'd be saying, give me as many players as you can. Bye.
Hello and welcome back to the Gill podcast, and today's guest is Tim Keech. So Tim is a co-founder of football analytics consultancy firm MRKT Insights, and those guys work with clubs all around the world to help with recruitment, strategic and long-term planning, and head coach appointments. Another thing that we speak about in this conversation is scouting from Africa. So Tim is a big proponent of this and believes the whole African market is still hugely undervalued, and there's many gems to be found in terms of bringing players over from Africa into Europe. So if you are interested in things like that in terms of recruitment, scouting and football analysis, and you want more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do enjoy this video, consider giving it a thumbs up. Okay, so one final thing before we get into the conversation, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which is the APFA, or the Association for Professional Football Analysts. So being a football analyst myself, this partnership makes perfect sense. So this is an association created by analysts for analysts, and they're doing a great job supporting people working in the industry. So there is a link down below, but more on those guys later. Let's get straight into today's video. Tim, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Chris. Good to meet you.
Yeah, definitely. So it's I'm looking forward to chatting. I've been on your Twitter, which is a good follow, to be honest. I've been looking back at some of your tweets and obviously LinkedIn, and we were actually part of a event for the APFA, which we'll talk about later in terms of that jobs in football. So lots to talk about. So for those that don't know who you are, Tim, if you would like to give yourself a quick introduction, who you currently are and what you're currently doing.
Great. So my name's Tim Keech. I founded a company about 5 years ago called MRKT Insights. We're a consulting firm. We've been started off probably mainly doing player recruitment, but we've moved into general analysis and then strategic advice and kind of recruitment of key personnel, so head coaches, sporting directors in the last few years. It really came about, probably, I call it my midlife crisis company. I was doing consultancy work outside of football for about a decade, with hospitals, NHS trusts, councils, kind of finding ways they could be more efficient and looking at where they work and helping them design new processes. And a lot of this, I felt, just as a football fan, would work in football as well. So I had a gap between contracts. I decided to write some of my thoughts down, and they very quickly got kind of picked up by people in the industry. And we ended up getting pieces of work, or I ended up getting pieces of work. And then I found on Twitter 4 or 5 other people who I really enjoyed the work they put out and had different skills. And one day I just said to them, like, shall we just put together a prospectus of what we could do as a service if we worked with a club? And we did this huge kind of 70, 80 page document about what we would do with Swansea City if we were in charge of recruitment or redesigning a process. And we sent it off to the club, and it's quite funny really, because nothing happened. We just assumed, fine. I've been in football, you get so many unsolicited pieces of advice, you just ignore them. But the fans of the club printed it off and took it to the AGM, and then it was handed to the club and handed to the new head recruitment, Andy Scott, who read it and liked it. And within a week, we were working as our first kind of consultant job within a club setting, and that was 5 years ago. And from then, it's kind of grown. I think we've worked with 33 clubs now, mainly in England, but also around the world. We've done work in America, India, even Cambodia in recent years, as well as the kind of up to Champions League level within European football. So been really exciting, really enjoyed it. And I happy to share any advice I can with your listeners.
Nice, perfect. So first one, why Swansea? Why was it Swansea? Why did you target them at the time?
So they just got Trevor Birch in as their new CEO, and he gave a kind of public announcement that they would be reviewing all the ways they worked and trying to kind of modernize the structures of the club. And then, so we started writing the pitch, and then actually one of the founders of Market Insights, Kevin Elphick, is a Swansea City fan. So we had kind of insider knowledge of the club from him. So it really kind of tied together nicely. So, yeah.
Nice. So he's a Swansea fan. You're an Everton fan, I believe, from what?
Yeah, it's glory hunting that went really badly wrong, is how I always describe it. But yeah, me, Andy, are Everton fans. We've got Ram, who's another co-founder, who is a Chelsea fan, and then Matt, who's another of the co-founders, is a Reading fan. So between us, we've all got various tales of woe. Ram less so, but it's heading that way. So
nice. The name, I mean, I feel like an idiot that I've just, as you stumbled across, that is the initials of all the founders, isn't
Matt,
it?
Ram, Kevin, and Tim. Yeah, it sounded a bit like Market. And Insights, which now I'm sure when we chose Insights, it wasn't as common a word as it is now in football, but everyone has an Insights department now. But
yeah,
I'm not claiming credit for that spreading. But yeah, we definitely stumbled across Insights as an early kind of way of describing us, what we do.
Nice. So from the website, I'm just going to quote a little bit what it says here. So data science, technical scouting, and player and head coach recruitment. Market Insights provides full operational and strategic services to football clubs and ownership groups. So you're saying there that was obviously co-founded coming on around 5 years now, Tim. So I'm just curious to ask you how the landscape of analytics in football has changed in that 5 years, and that goes for in general, but also I suppose your services have probably changed since you started with Swansea to now. So can you touch upon that a little bit, Tim?
Yeah, I think to start with, our first kind of 6 months of operation, we were Y-Scout filters, a shared Google sheet, and watching lots and lots of football and building up a database of players. And yeah, filters, I still think, are the best way to, that gives you 90% of the value of analytics is just being able to use filters, so age, and then a few key filters for a positional profile. And that 5 years ago, that was probably enough to give you quite a large edge in terms of scouting and recruitment. Now you see kind of free tools people give out that help you search whole markets of players. So certainly the kind of the level of awareness of analytics within football clubs has massively increased. Again, 5 years ago, we were often setting up the first analytics service these clubs have had. Now, I'd say almost everyone has a login to a system. Whether they use it or use it well is another question. I think there's a massive gap between clubs who think they do analytics and clubs who actually do use kind of analytical thinking in their decision-making processes. That's still a huge disconnect there, I think. But I think the awareness of this stuff is actually quite useful, is now there and fairly universal. And then what we have in addition to that is kind of the next level. So the clubs like Arsenal, for example, who have got like a huge in-house analytics team. And then some clubs use people like us as a service to provide them with in-depth analytics. And then a lot of clubs will just have a login to a system, and a junior analyst or someone might just check the numbers on a player they already like. And that's quite a common theme, is like, we've identified a player, now look at the numbers. Whilst I think people like us say, look at the numbers and then check the players. And there's still that disconnect, or that different way of working. It's whatever people want to do is fine, but we prefer it the other way around.
Yeah. So obviously there's different things you can do in terms of you mentioned head coach recruitment, the performance side of things and the scouting. But I mean, from your background, you mentioned earlier you're working with hospitals things, so it's not even in football. So I suppose you can use data to help clubs in many ways outside of just the typical recruitment and performance.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's we often talk about football is there's the football department and then there's everything else that helps the club run. But I actually think the more you kind of try and isolate football from the rest of the club, the worse the club is run. I think it has to be kind of a holistic view of a club, and the football operations shouldn't be completely disconnected and seen as like sacred that no one can interfere with. The good of the club has to come first, and I think good ownership is always about looking at the whole club and saying like, okay, we can increase turnover and everyone can be working massively hard to squeeze every penny of efficiency out of this department. But then if we give a single player a £10,000 a week extra on their contracts, that undoes hundreds of people work for the whole year. Yeah. And it often is that kind of realization that data and just it's not so much numbers for the sake of numbers, it's numbers to inform decisions, and I think that has to go across the whole club.
Yeah. So with those kind of different ways that you can help clubs, I'm kind of curious to ask you then, Tim, are you approaching clubs with a mind of how you can help that particular club, or are clubs coming to you with certain projects they might want to outsource to you? How does that kind of look? Because you can, as I said, help them in different ways.
Almost always word of mouth is how we work. We're terrible at marketing, never do any outbound sales, never do any suggestions of how we could actually help, which is not so much a question of not wanting to do it. It's more a question of time. And we're a startup company, we've owned by our founders. We haven't taken external investments. So every penny we do, every contract we take, we're working on ourselves. So what we tend to do is we give some suggestions publicly about the types of things we've done, but then often we just do one-off strategic projects. So recently we've helped a European club with a strategy around how best to allocate their scouting budget. So they've got a certain amount of money to spend. They've got territories and players they want to look for, and certain profiles of players. Where are the best markets to look for that type of player? And again, it's like we take that, we put together a 30-40 page analysis of maybe even more longer than that, of the leagues with the closest match to their individual playing style, the types of resale value and acquisition value for players in different markets, and those kind of short pieces of one-off consulting work are really interesting projects to work on, and those ones tend to be kind of cold approaches. Can you help us with this type of project? And then we've got our kind of recurring revenue projects, which will be a club saying, can we retain you as a service to help our scouting team and to provide us with kind of some kind of contingency planning around head coach work or sporting director work or anything like that. And we have maybe 10 clients that we are on a kind of a monthly retainer to support the club in lots of different ways. And sometimes that's providing them with software that we've developed for club management or for scouting and recruitment. And sometimes that is literally working with the owner or the sporting director on a kind of advisory basis. So they would say to us, some legislation is changing, what's the impact on us? And we'll go away and do some research on, for example, around Brexit, there was a lot of changes with work permit rules. So how can we get a strategic advantage? And we call that time for work like meta opportunities. So you've got the kind of the normal football that's going on all the time, and most of that is going to be related to how well you spend your budget. But then once in a while, you get these opportunities that are short-term ways you can move the club forwards. And for example, around work permits, it was like, okay, well, suddenly we've opened up the ability to recruit African youth internationals. How do we scout those markets? What is the adaptation period with our ESC slots, which is a new type of work permit? How many can we have? What's the best use of those? So some clubs who are the kind of what I call the smart clubs are thinking about these opportunities all the time. Others, for lack of resources or lack of that way of thinking, just wait to see what happens. And they're less likely to use us, I think.
Yeah, nice. So you mentioned Africa there. We're going to come to that because I have that down as a talking point in terms of recruiting from Africa. So hopefully, you said there you don't do much marketing. So hopefully someone in clubs may watch this video and see this as well, Tim. So hopefully that will help out. Okay, so I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far, but I have a quick interruption just to tell you a little bit more about the sponsor of today's video, the APFA, or the Association of Professional Football Analysts. As I mentioned, this is an organisation created by analysts for analysts, and they're doing a great job in supporting people working within the industry. So if you are a football analyst, you are probably already aware of the APFA, which is great, and that probably has a lot to do with their incredible jobs board. So if there is a football club or a team or organisation from anywhere around the world that is looking to hire for a football analyst, the chances are those jobs will be listed on the APFA jobs board. So it's really interesting to see the diversity of the jobs, actually, because I've seen a lot more niche roles over the last few months. So there's loads of different roles that are available now within football analysis. So if you are looking for your next position, or maybe your first position, you should definitely check out the jobs board that is on the APFA website. So another good thing about the APFA is their educational content. So as I mentioned, the whole community is built by analysts. So the courses that they are able to deliver are very specific to the roles and responsibilities that you'll face as a football analyst. So for example, they have a post-match analysis course, they've got an individual player analysis course, and they've also got an opposition analysis course. So 3 great ones there, but having spoken to the guys at the APFA recently, I know they are working on some more really good ones actually. So definitely check those out if you're looking to enhance your knowledge and become more employable in the world of football analysis. So because they are a sponsor, they've kindly allowed a 10% discount for any viewers of my channel. So there is a link down below the video in the description. So you can click that link to go direct to their website. You can check out the jobs board, see if there's anything on there for you. And then the courses, as I mentioned, you do get 10% off if you use code GILL10. So that's GILL10. GILL10 to get 10% off any course that is listed on the APFA website. So thanks again to the APFA for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the conversation. I was wondering if you can, so just going back to the head coach kind of recruitment, if you can give a hypothetical. So if I am let's say I'm a technical director at a club or an owner of a club, and I come to you, we've just sacked our manager or we're thinking about sacking the manager, what goes into that kind of work for you to help us, my team, recruit a manager that'll fit?
So yeah, I'm glad you said we're thinking about sacking the manager, because that's the best time. The best time is to do it all the time. The second best time is when you're thinking about it, and then when most people approach is when they've already done it. So what we tend to do is if it's an advance, what we tend to do is work with the club to say, like, what do you want? Like, everyone's got a different idea of what a director of football does. Everyone has a different idea of what they want from a head coach, and a lot of the time there's this idea of like, what's the culture of the club? So a really kind of a Barcelona type club who wants to play in a certain style of football. They've developed a reputation for playing. They obviously have a fairly defined vision of what their club is. Not many clubs do, and it can change over time. And you can get 5 different answers by speaking to 5 different people. I think Kevin Thelwell said recently on a podcast, like, what's the Everton way? It's like a blend of 2 quite distinct styles of kind of like aggressive dogs of war type football, but also kind of the school of science football from an earlier era. And it's like you've got not so much 2 camps, because everyone wants a bit of both. But it's hard to find and recruit to a hybrid kind of vision of a club. And I think if you're talking about a lower league English football team and they've got a certain way that fans within that club want to play, you can either go with it or you can try and change it. And those are the two options you've got. And if you strongly believe we can't play, for example, let's say a lower league team that's only ever had success playing really like long ball, traditional 4-4-2, get in the corners, cross it football, and you don't think as the ownership of that club that is going to do what you want to do, so add value to players, climb up through the leagues, win more games of football. So you can try and change that, and that has to be a process they lead, kind of communicating very clearly. Someone like Simon Hallett at Plymouth, who we worked with for a good number of years, is really good at communicating to the fans, and that is missing at a lot of clubs. He will say, we've got a 5-year plan, this is what it is, we're going to go away and work on it. And part of that is a certain style of football and a certain way of developing players. And it wasn't suddenly pining for 4-4-2 and put it in the corners and get crosses in, because it was clear that wasn't the vision for the club. And he brought people along with him. A lot of ownership says, we've just bought a club, we're going to play like Manchester City. Well, you're not if you're in League Two. You can move towards it over several seasons, but it's very hard to play certain styles of football at certain levels. So it's always like, speak with the clubs, find out what they want to do, find out how close they currently are to playing like they say they'll play. And that's where we use data. So we kind of codify their game model, which is just a posh way of saying we look at how they want to play, and then we look at the data that flags up for teams who play in that style. So, for example, a possession-based attacking team might have long pass sequences. It might have lots of passes going through central areas. It might have controlled entries to the final third. And we take a basket of metrics that correlate with that style of play. We then apply that across the whole of football. So got the whole of the Y-Scout API with every single football team across the world, look at who the manager was, look at how they play, and look at how they played before and which managers have made a significant change. So a good example of that is someone like Marty Cifuentes at QPR. So take it over from Gareth Ainsworth, and the data very quickly went from one of the lowest possession teams to a well above average possession team in the course of a couple of months. So you're looking for managers who can move a team towards that style of play they want to play. You take into context budget, you take into context competition within that league. And then you've basically got then a system that can kind of automatically flag people who either are or have managed in that style. And we would create like an automated search tool for that club that can say, this is that club's style of play, click a button, here's here's everyone in England, France, Scotland, wherever that has coached a team to play that style. We then so the manager's still in post. When they decide to make a change, it's like we've already probably as a service reached out to quite a few of these guys and said, no job now, but let's just have a talk. If they're out of work, we can have a conversation like this. And we've done lots of those, and we've helped quite a lot of coaches into work just by like chatting to them before jobs come up. Yeah. And then if it's a contract that we have, then great. If it's not, I can still give them kind of counsel about whether I think it's a good match for them. So yeah, it's basically build up it's a matchmaking service. Basically, it's just saying like, this is the guy, I think he'll get on with this club, and he coaches in their style, put them together, they get on great. And what we tend to do is give them a revolving shortlist of maybe 20 or 30 names to be considering the next time they make a change. And if they don't, and 2-3 years pass, great. And we can look back and say, this is the list of 30 names from a couple of years ago. Here are the ones who've gone on to do really well. Those are out of reach. Here are the ones who are still in reach. These are the ones who are out of work. We've spoken to those two recently, and they're looking for work and actively on the market. And that service kind of means that when they do pull the trigger and get rid of the manager, you've got automatically a shortlist ready to go of people that you already know play your style. And it's then a case of, do you get on with them? And that's probably that relationship between owner, sporting staff, and manager is like the main part of the decision making, rather than, oh, who can we get? We've got no idea who we'd hire. So yeah, that service has been really picked up a lot in the last couple of years. We've done Champions League, English Championship, and all down through the FL, quite a lot of jobs recently.
Yeah, nice. So when you said that, so are you in contact with, so if I'm an out of work manager now, would you be in contact with me saying this club, or is it just you working with the clubs? So, you know, like, would you alert me of a job potentially coming up in a couple of months because the guy's going to be sacked and I might be a fit? Would you?
Yeah, we get paid. Normally the way it works is we get paid by the club. So we don't have any kind of vested interest in a particular manager getting a particular job. So to keep ourselves as like independent arbitrators between the club and the manager, we would work we'd work with the club hires us, and then we provide a service. But in the meantime, we are meeting, like been out to lunch with or gone for a drink with quite a few managers. I've just done countless Zoom conversations where we basically just get them to do a presentation like they would give to a club, and that enables us to give them feedback on whether we think it's pitched to the right people. Because as I always say, you're actually pitching to the owner. You're not pitching to the football staff, and owners have a vastly different knowledge of football, but they also want to hear certain things about how you're going to look after their multi-100 million pound investment and how you're going to treat the players they've put huge amounts of resources into. So I think it's a case of like, working with the managers as a kind of independent advisory service, which is, we don't charge them for that, but it's also then just kind of matchmaking and saying, well, if you work with Market Insights as a club, you get access to this service, which is already running. So it's not really it's not an agency thing. It's not a representation thing. It's more a matchmaking service between footballers and football clubs and managers.
Yeah, nice. So next thing I want to ask you, Tim, I noticed the recent blog post you did about risk. So you mentioned actually just a second ago in terms of big investments, there's lots of obviously money involved in the game. So one thing that was from the blog post that I'll just quote here. So the problem in football is a lack of alignment between risk and reward. So can you just explain what you meant by that and expand on a little bit if you can?
Yeah, because I think we talk about risk. What's the risk for a football club of doing this? But within that risk profile, you've got several different layers of risk. You've got the risk for the long-term health of the football club, which should be the main focus, and that's what we always talk to clubs about, the long-term health of the football club. And then you've got the almost opposite risk of, within a football club, almost everyone there is on a short-term contract and there's constant pressure on them to deliver or be fired. So you say to me, here's a project, it's going to transform this club for the better, and it's going to take 5 years before we notice any impact. I'm not going to be here in 5 years. You're not going to be here in 5 years. That's someone else who's going to be basking in the glory of that decision. So as a short-term employee, it's very hard to say, I will forego now for a much better future when we can have a much brighter next 6 months, and I can get a job with Manchester United, and you can go to Chelsea on £1 million a year, because we've got this club from 17th to 6th, and everyone says we're geniuses. But actually, if we had not spent that money, we'd maybe gone like 17th next season, and then 6th, and then 1st. So my risk profile as an employee is different to your risk profile as a club owner.
Yeah.
And if it's almost like who makes the decisions? Are there short-term decisions and long-term decisions? How do you allocate budgets to ensure that that kind of risk is that money that is kind of invested by the club owner to improve the club is actually spent on things that improve the club rather than kind of short-term sugar high type decisions where yes, it was great Everton had James Rodriguez and Alan and all those players for a year, but they got 60 points instead of 50 points, but they've now lost back those 10 points in a fines and points deductions. So you can ruin a club very quickly by having a really short-term fun couple of months. So it's almost like I always look at risk as how you look at different people's appetites for risk, and also you have to accept as a club owner if you make fans wait, they can be horrible. Like I read like it's one of those things you look back at stuff you used to post before you worked in football about people, and you think that's so. Now I read like the forums of some of the clubs we work with and just see what people are saying. I'm like, that's just so wrong. There's not, that person is nothing like that. That decision was not made like that. You don't know the circumstances this club works in. And I'm much more sympathetic to individuals and the pressure that fans put individuals under and just horrible comments about people nonstop. It makes decisions more short term because if you can win the game on Tuesday, maybe you won't be an idiot. But your kind of idea you can build something up long term can be scuppered very quickly just by people being horrible to you.
Very true.
It does. I genuinely believe like owners need to communicate better to take fans on that journey so they do realize it's long term, but also like fans need to calm down with the kind of personal stuff because it does have a negative impact on the decisions clubs make all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting that because when you do think risk, you firstly, rightly or wrong, just think of the money risk, the monetary risk. But you said there like the reputational risk of the members of staff, like they don't want to be seen as the guy that brought in a player or did something that didn't look good in that 6-month period when it was there for a longer term play kind of thing. So another thing in that piece, Tim, which I found interesting, just a short piece, was on the example of Declan Rice, kind of the money he was sold for and how academy players, that's relying on youth as opposed to buying players. I think it was something you said, kind of 95% of players at under 18s have literally no value to the club, but then it is just like one person that could then pay for the whole academy running costs for several years if you are to find them. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that almost kind of ties in with the African project that we're working on. Like I often say to clubs, like if you take a single 17-year-old African kid, Nigerian particularly, where we're doing most of our work on trial, the likelihood of them making is so small. Like we're not saying that every player you take is going to make it. These are kids who don't play in academy leagues. They haven't been through the filtering process from birth that you get in England. Like if my son's brilliant at football, someone is going to notice in England. Like he's going to play on his school team, is going to be picked up by a club in the park. Something is going to happen that identifies him as being really talented. But in somewhere like rural Nigeria, you don't have that same infrastructure around scouting. Like locally, you'll be known as a really good player, but there's no way for that information to filter into a professional club for you to be looked after and taught how to play football in a certain way from the age of 6, as we do in the UK. It's going to be natural talent that is underdeveloped in lots of ways. Like we also talk about a coaching age. Like we brought some really good young Nigerian players over. They trained with a really good academy in the UK recently. And on the first day, they just didn't really know what to do in the training sessions. Like there were certain movements that these academy players they were training with have been taught since birth. And they were just like, well, what do I do? Where do I move? And when the club and the club were great, and they kind of gave them a few days to adapt and really kind of held their hands through the first training sessions. And by the end of the trial period, one of the two players they wanted to immediately sign one, and the other one is someone they'll monitor very closely. So I think that the question of, it's a bit of a cliche, but the natural talent is there. And the thing that, so to link it back to the academy thing, if we're saying like 1 in 20 of these players can become a £100 million asset, maybe that's a bit of exaggeration, but one can be a £10 million asset. Of the 20 we bring over, one can be a £10 million asset. And the other ones who you sign and fail will probably only cost you a couple of years of a first year scholar type wage. To me, that is a bet I'd be making all the time. I'd be saying, give me as many players as you can. But what we found is we've taken these players into League Two clubs, League One clubs in England. And the first question is, what if they fail? It's never what if they can succeed.
Yeah.
And these players, they've said, no, we can't risk taking them on trial. Have then gone on to sign for big kind of Belgium, Czech Republic clubs. One of the clubs we work with in Nigeria has multiple kind of multi-million, £5 to £10 million plus players playing around Europe. But they probably send 5 a year, and maybe every 3 years they get one who really like breaks out and becomes really valuable. So 15 players, one of them becomes a £10 million player. To me, again, I take that risk I can have 15 and it costs me maybe £1 million in flights and visas and wages. And one becomes worth 10. That's a 10 times return on my investment. But getting a club to risk £1 million to get 10 when they could spend that £1 million on somebody who's going to start on Wednesday for the vital game, it's always going to be difficult.
Enjoying the video so far, but I have a really quick interruption for anybody with an interest in video analysis. So if that's you, please do click the link down below the video for InPlay Online. So just to give a quick overview, because I think it'll be relevant to a lot of people that are watching this particular video. So InPlay Online is a cloud-based video analysis software. So it allows you to tag your videos, and when you've done your tagging, that includes adding labels, adding comments, adding notes and voice notes even, and you can even illustrate and draw over your clip. So if you are an aspiring analyst looking for your job and you want to create a portfolio of work, if you're a scout looking to make your kind of reports a little bit better and more animated, if you're a coach looking to get into analysis a little bit more, then this tool will be great for you because it starts at just £15 a month. So once you've done your analysis, you can add all the clips to different playlists, which can be downloaded and exported offline. You can put them into presentations and also share them to different people within your team. So it comes with a whole bunch of other features, but I'll let you click the link down below if you are interested. As I say, packages start at just £15 a month, so it's a very affordable solution if you are looking for something to help with your video analysis. So that's it for the interruption. Let's get back to the video. So it comes down back to the long-term, short-term thinking. So what other risks are involved then in terms of like rules and regulations, like work permits and stuff like that? How does all that look in the bringing people over from Africa?
If you're bringing players into England, then they have to have to qualify for an ESC, which is the new kind of, they called it like it's a more relaxed work permit. So we've got GB work permits where you have to be playing in a top league for a certain number of minutes and games. If you're coming from Africa and you're a youth international under 17, under 20 within the last 2 years, you can qualify for an ESC wildcard permit. They were calling it. It's quite strict, even though it's called a wildcard permit. And you qualify then, and if you play sufficient first team games, you can convert that into a permanent GB permit. So you can get players on trial even if they don't yet qualify for an ESC. So we had players over in England who wouldn't yet qualify because they're too young. You have to be 18 to move over. So if we bring a 17-year-old, you can't sign them immediately. You can do kind of pre-contracts. You can look at ways of doing it, but you can identify that the next Victor Osimhen is coming out of Nigeria. We've got him. We can bring him over to you. You'll do everything you can then to sign him. So some of these multi-club networks have got kind of built-in pathways where they can send them abroad. The English clubs have to use one of their slots. And yeah, it's complex. My colleague Matt spent a lot of time reading the regulations of the Nigerian visa rules and arranging travel for players, which is never straightforward. We've got passports have to be issued. We've got things like bone density scans for proof of age. Quite a lot of clubs will ask for. So there's a lot that goes into it. But I think the quality of players, we've already moved a couple over to England, a couple into Scandinavia. And we've got many, many more players that we believe have the quality to play at a very high competitive level. And we're kind of slowly moving them into Europe mainly because you don't have to be youth international to qualify for a European permit, but you do. Within England, it's much stricter, but still possible.
And is there a league in Europe or leagues in Europe that you find it easier for the African players to move to, like maybe adapt to better, or is there a country that is doing more of this, like the more Africans are going to that place as a concentration? Like how does that look?
Yeah, I think so. Denmark with Right to Dream and Ghana, the connection there. I mean, and also Midtjylland have got FC Edebe, which is a Nigerian club who they've maybe bought $40 or $50 million worth of player sales have been generated out of a small club in Nigeria. So it's one of those situations where the countries who have tried it and succeeded, so the Czech Republic's another one, the appetite is there to take more and more and more players because they're like, why is no one else? Or Norway's another one. There's a particular agent who moves players into Norway, like Gift Orban and Boniface, who have come out of there. And now every Norwegian club wants more African players because they've got a certain limited number of foreign player slots, and they realise they can get players for relatively cheap, and the upside if one succeeds is so high that they can take the risk of multiple failures. So again, it's like that risk reward thing. The countries who are doing it are seeing the upside, and the ones that haven't yet done it are seeing the risk.
Yeah. What's the coverage of data and video like for the leagues for the different countries? Is it still got a lot of work to be done? Like how does that look?
Yeah, huge amount of work to be done. So also the thing that you kind of realize that the longer you work there is that, again, we talk about how players are filtered up into different clubs. So again, if you've got a kid who's playing for Gillingham at 13 and they're brilliant within the youth leagues, Chelsea or whoever are going to sign them. It's like they have scouts at every game. They have games videos. They have opposition analysis for youth teams nowadays. Whilst in Nigeria, it was like, or even like a good example is that kid Diamande, who went to Sporting Lisbon. He was signed by Midtjylland from the third division of the Ivory Coast, went to Midtjylland for 6 months, loaned to Mafra in Portugal for 6 months. After 10 games, Sporting Lisbon had bought him for 7 million out of the Portuguese second division. And it's like the talent would never be allowed to be playing in the third division of the Ivory Coast in England. It would be straight away picked up by 14 and then straight into an academy program. And then you look at where the players have come from in the national teams. In England, the under 16 group, now it's like Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, Southampton, Brighton, Arsenal probably have the majority of the players in every squad. Whilst in Nigeria or something like that, most of the players are from non-professional clubs. There's hardly any youth systems in the traditional way that we would think of. The biggest clubs would have the best youth systems. They're disparate population of tiny kind of academies who provide the players. And then at 18, when they can sign professional deals abroad, they go off all over the world. You find players in Azerbaijan and Albania who are like really high quality youth internationals. So again, it's like that pathway just isn't there in the same way it is here.
Yeah, I feel like maybe this is a thing or not, but like the top clubs, let's say Chelsea, for example, a club with a lot of money, can they not just go? And I'm saying this as if Africa is not a huge place. I know it's huge, but can they not just go over and have an academy, a couple of Chelsea academies dotted around Africa, and they almost replicate their academy system in England, but they're just bringing in Africans, and then they can use them because obviously multi-club ownership, they can send them around to the different clubs. Is that a thing? Is that a thing that could happen?
It's something I've pushed to almost every Premier League club in the last few years, just to say you've got to. And the question is then that risk thing. Like there's the reputational risk. There's the lack of, like, we think of football clubs probably as much bigger than they are in terms of resources. Often they have financial resources, but they don't really have like human resources. They don't have a lot of people who would know how to do that. And there's a sense, like we would say you could outsource it to us, but there's like always that kind of thing in football of like the inner circle, the trusted people within a club have to be in on the decision. And there's also a real kind of lack of knowledge of the area. Like we're so fortunate in that when we went over to Nigeria the first time a couple of years ago, my colleague Matt was able to make some really good connections with very kind of established and well kind of people who are just trustworthy and have delivered everything they said they'd deliver on time, within budget, and exceeded our expectations in every way. So you've got to have those trusted local partners, and most people don't. And most people wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know where to start. It was literally my colleague Matt being able to make those connections through kind of really close relationships that enabled us to find the people who are now run our Nigerian project. And if you get it wrong, it can be disastrous. So you have to really like know what you're doing. So yeah, I would say in the future, I definitely see that happening. I see when it works, more and more clubs will just look at the demographics, look at the way I always explain it is like there's more kids in Nigeria than the whole of the European Union. It's like unbelievable density of population in West Africa, and it's like with a couple of £1 million over a couple of years, really, it's one reserve team player for a big club now, and you can do it. You could do it. We could do it with someone. It's possible. It's just I feel now we're at a position where we're starting to see the fruits of the work we put in over the last few years. So I hope they stay away. we can dominate the market. But
nice. No, it's really interesting. So in terms of then recruitment more close to home, then I feel like it's obviously recruitment and scouting is a very hard thing to get right. People get sacked for bad decisions all the time. What do you feel, Tim, that most teams maybe get wrong, or how they can improve? Just a simple thing that you see maybe happens wrong a lot of times, or just an improvement that you could implement at clubs.
Like the single biggest thing I always say is like knowing what you want. Like, how do you want to play? Because what you see sometimes on Twitter and LinkedIn as these like kind of 40-page breakdowns with freeze frames of tactical lineups and things. And most coaches working in the higher levels of football are good coaches. They know lots of different ways they can set up teams. But a lot what we found over the last few years is the ones who kind of really separate themselves as being the best coaches we work with are able to kind of take the complexities of what they do and put it into layman's terms and explain, I want a defensive midfielder who does this. Yeah. And this is what I want. And the easiest thing to do in football is just to give people a list of good players. Like, it's not difficult at all. And if you're wanting to be a scout or break into scouting, get yourself a Wire Scout subscription, which I understand now is massively more expensive than it was a few years ago, and the barriers to entry are much higher. Get some source of video that you can go through, get some source of basic data, learn how to identify good players, because that bit is easy. You can say who's consistently making a certain type of pass, who's making a certain type of run, all that information, and who's dribbling and shooting a lot from wide areas. Like some of our biggest transfer successes are particularly someone like Plymouth, where we had 5 transfer windows, working with the club really closely. It's not rocket science. It's like literally like we knew how we wanted to play. We knew the attributes that the team needed in different positions. And then it's just a case like someone like Morgan Whittaker. It's like, what's he do? He shoots well from wide areas. What's the team lacking? Someone who can play as a 10 and get shots off. And it's beyond that is then just watching them and making sure that everything about the rest of their game is how you want. But the actual ID part of the talent identification process is straightforward. The recruitment part is much more difficult. So actually then nowadays you won't be the only person who spotted that he's a good player. So you've got competition. So how do you persuade that player that it's yours? And that's where the clarity from the coach and the ability of the coach to play a part in recruitment, that kind of process of persuasion of the player to join you is vital. And the biggest difference I think between the clubs where the clubs have been really successful and we've worked with them and the clubs where it hasn't worked as well has been the ability to convert from identification to signing. And that a lot of that comes down to the manager and the sporting directors, powers of persuasion. And then it's timing. So timing's a huge issue. Like the worst thing when you're a scout is you've picked out a player, you've got a deal lined up, and then they score 3 consecutive hat tricks in the week before the transfer window and they're gone. And that happens so frequently that you get very, very upset by players playing well that you've identified. They've got this kind of fine balance between they've got to play well enough that the club doesn't change their mind and say he's terrible, but poorly enough that no one else picks up how good he could be. And then the other one is like almost like luck. So one of our kind of ones that got away stories is a player who's probably now regarded as one of the best attackers in Europe. Everyone wants him. And he's valued at 50, 60, 70 million pounds plus. We actually signed him for a club we worked with maybe 4 years ago. And he barely played. And when he did, he was regarded as rubbish and they didn't sign him permanently. And it was one of those painful ones where you thought, I can see this player's good, but he was a good player, but he didn't fit the system. And he didn't, because he didn't fit the system, he didn't show what he was capable of. He was played in a wider role rather than a central role. It just didn't really click. And also, but his underlying numbers were still good. Like if you looked at his underlying data saying, is he doing what you want an attacker to do? Does he get in the box? Does he generate shots? Does he hold the ball up well? Yes, tick, tick, tick. So a clever club picked him up and then made a huge amount of profit on him because they looked at the underlying rather than the actual performances. But it's very hard in a club situation to say, and I've done this recently and had my head bitten off before it, is sit there and say, well, actually, his numbers are pretty good. And the manager's like, well, he's not doing anything on the pitch that is keeping me in a job because he's not scoring. He's not creating. He might be doing lots of things that show he might do in the future, but he's not doing it now. And it is that kind of thing where again, that risk reward thing we talked about earlier. For me, as the numbers person in that meeting, it's easy to say, stick with it. For him, who's getting shouted at by 30,000 fans every week that this player's rubbish and doesn't know what he's doing, and this player is not producing, then his risk is much higher than mine, and I have to appreciate that it's his neck on the line as much as it is ours as a consultancy that can be axed any second if they don't like us. It's also a case that I don't have 30,000 people who think I'm an idiot because of it.
Okay, so if you've made it this far into the video, you must be enjoying the content. Either that or you have simply fallen asleep. So whichever one of them it is, you probably won't mind me asking you for a quick favour. So as you know, I'm always looking to grow the channel. So the bigger the channel gets, the more people we can reach and impact, but also the bigger and better guests we can invite on to the channel to have these types of chats. So with that in mind, if you haven't already done so, I would very much appreciate it if you did hit the subscribe button down below the video. The stats are showing around 25% of viewers are subscribed. So there's a big chunk of you that are watching the videos, but you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, but I will let you off because you can do it right now. It's free and it literally takes 1 second. So if you go down, click the subscribe button, it would mean a lot to the channel and help the channel to grow. So that's all for now. Let's get back to the video. Yeah, it does feel, especially like in the championship, for example, like everyone is just like looking for a small pool of players. Like everyone's looking at the same players you mentioned there, and it does come down to persuasion and stuff like that. But I suppose like things like location, like Plymouth, obviously miles out the way from a lot of places. Like I'm a Sunderland fan, so we're up at the top. Like that plays a big part in it as well. And then I suppose that leads to then teams just being a little bit more desperate and thinking, well, just paying a little bit more just to get him. And then that's when the whole payment structures and planning goes out the window because people just want that quick fix, and it's just easier to pay over the odds than maybe walk away and think, well, no, let's go to our next option because it's not fitting at that point. So yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. So let me go. So see, scouting there is very, very hard. So let me go to actually another blog post that you've done, Tim. So I had this down as a question, and then I think this is quite a recent one in terms of, and we've touched upon it already, in terms of long-term planning as a football club and succession planning and things like that. So I presume, I think you may have said this already, but does Market Insights help towards that in terms of succession planning and planning for the next, say, 5 years or so for a club?
Yeah, we've done what I call strategic planning. So like, what is that 5-year plan? Lots of clubs will have a kind of a dusty version from 2020 they haven't looked at since they wrote it. So it's like one of the big things that we always talk to clubs about is actually following through on these plans. Like it's very easy to do a really nice glossy 200-page PowerPoint that no one ever really looks at once it's done, and no one takes it seriously. So it is more like actually simpler, definable pieces of work that you can go through and say, this club, okay, we say on our vision of what the club is, it's going to be a club that produces its own talent. It's going to really concentrate on developing young players. It's going to have a player trading model that generates lots of money. It's going to have a certain style of play. All those things are nice ambitions, but each of those has a kind of bit of work or a lot of work behind it. So how do you then resource that? How do you look at the profit and loss over the next 5 years? And we don't tend to delve massively into the accountancy side of it, but we can definitely work with clubs to say, realistically, what's it take to run an academy and do some benchmarking costs? What's it cost? How do you develop a style of play? Like, is that across the whole club? If so, like some of the best sporting directors I work with, I'd say they're project managers. That's what the job is. It's not sitting in an office with the manager talking about watching 20 hours of footage of the next opponent. That's a different job. To me, a director of football, a sporting director, is to direct the whole direction of the club into what they want to be. So, I mean, we recently helped a sporting director hire at Barnsley. And one of the really good things with that club is it's got a really engaged ownership who have a clear vision for where they want the club to do. And they're also really open to ideas. So one of the big things I did during the recruitment process was probably spoke to 60 people looking to become sporting directors for probably half an hour to an hour each. And the thing I really wanted to get from them, because they'd already been filtered by CVs, so it was already like, you can do the job. You've got the masters in sporting directorship. You've done multiple work across different clubs or departments. You tick every box. But beyond that, there's the idea of like, how do you actually do it? So how would you actually implement stuff? So some of the questions I asked were like examples of projects they'd seen through to completion, because it's very easy to do an idea. It's very hard then to see it through. So what have they done from start to finish? And then also, like, my big thing that kind of differentiates people is their ideas and like the quality of the ideas they had. So I really wanted people to explain what they would do, how they'd see it through, where they see competitive advantage in football. Because the biggest thing to me is like everyone can achieve roughly in line with their budget. It's then how do you get the extras that put you over the top? So someone like Plymouth, again, going back to Plymouth Argyle, they've got a really clear way of working. They've got processes that are just very, very robust. Every week there's a meeting at the same time with the same people, regardless of result. That doesn't happen in most clubs. Most clubs, it's firefighting, it's cancelled meetings, it's people being late for things. There, it was just like 10 o'clock every Monday, recruitment meet. We discussed the weekend. I wasn't in these meetings with my colleagues, but they discussed the weekend's games, identify the weaknesses, identify recruitment solutions for them, keep the list updated, do the background research, and then you're ready for the window. Did all the business early in the window. And that simply doesn't happen at most clubs. So again, it's just getting people in who can do processes well. And then when they think of an idea, actually then break it down into the pathway, the plan to deliver, and then see it through. And to me, that's where these good clubs can kind of separate themselves.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask you about the appointment that you had at Barnsley with the new sporting director there. So I think Mladen comes from an analytics background. So I wanted to ask you there, do you feel that will be, and will more clubs go down that route and hire like a data personnel type of person for the sporting director role? Do you feel is that increasing over time?
I think it's a kind of natural consequence of more clubs having data analytics departments and more people. Like Liverpool obviously did the same thing with kind of promoting through the data people as they're seen. But I'd say with Mladen and with people like Michael Edwards who've gone on, data is part of it. Like data it's more like a project management mindset for how you break things down and you work through things. So it's that kind of logical thinking. It's not that they're dispassionate people at all. And within the Barnsley process, there were people who didn't have data backgrounds at all, but were also really good logical thinkers. And I think everyone who got to the last kind of 5 to 10 candidates were people that would get on really well with the Barnsley ownership, who are also kind of logical people. And data as logic is part of it, but there are also people who are kind of former professional players. But when you speak to them, they've got really clear logical ways of working and embrace change and embrace things like data. But so I don't think you necessarily have to have been an analyst or worked with big data sets to be in the mix for these jobs. But I think it's a mindset of the way you work. I think increasingly, particularly with American owners, they come from sports backgrounds which are very heavily reliant on the numbers guys coming up with interesting things, so and insights from data, and they demand a way of working that suits people who have that kind of mindset. So yeah, I do see more kind of analysis into senior management rather than just kind of big name playing career into senior management. I think, having spoken to a lot of footballers, this stereotype of footballers having one way of looking at it and analysts having the other, they're just people. They're just like people who are really good at the football, and that doesn't mean they're not also really good at other stuff. And likewise, people who can't kick a ball doesn't mean they can't be experts in football, in terms of the management and the organisation of football clubs. If you'd seen me in my peak, you would not have thought I'd be working as an advisor to football clubs. But I have always thought, like, around the space, football is greater than just the dressing room and the ability on pitch. I think there's more to go around, more kind of perspectives that can be given from people who've got different skill sets.
Yeah, nice. So you said Market Insights coming up around 5 years. So I want to ask you a little bit about just any future predictions, trends you see, whether it be for Market Insights, what do you see maybe over the next 5 years, but also the landscape as a whole, how maybe clubs will change their perception of consultancy services, for example, and just in general, how things may change.
I think like one of the probably the biggest trends we'll see is the data providers. So at the moment we have Scout, we have StatsBomb, we have Opta, and Impact and people like that who gather their own data. So they're kind of primary gatherers of data. What we found is that the number of people who sell data to third parties has dropped off. Like StatsBomb sold direct to clubs, and that was their kind of thing. They've slightly altered that now, but I think it's almost exclusively clubs they sell to.
Yeah.
Then you've got Huddle, Y-Scouts owners who will sell to third parties like us to develop products and services, and Impact as well. I believe that type of organisation will have the ability to resell to third parties if they believe they will treat their data nicely. And so what you have is the data providers, and you've got the kind of people building software products off those data feeds. So that's what we did initially. Is we took data feeds, we then developed our own dashboards and our own search engines and everything that could process that data, interpret it, and then resell it in a form of consultancy for us, and in a form of software tools for other people. And then I see, that kind of data interpretation role that we probably specialize in now. So rather than saying, here's all the raw data, or here's our process data, search for your own players, we're saying, here are the players, here's the data, here's the data search, here's what you look like in data, and all that type of thing. That is where I see us as a consultancy service. What I would say is, not a week goes by now without a new software product or a new consultancy service being set up. And these are often kind of backed with quite a lot of funding. So they get startup funding, they come into the market, they invest a couple of £1 million over a couple of years into trying to build a service. I question whether the market is big enough. I question whether there's enough clubs who will use a service or will use an additional software product that doesn't offer them anything particularly different to what they have. Like if we have a software product and it says this player is good, the likelihood is it's going to look good in everyone's software product, because there are certain metrics that are obvious that flag good players, even if it's just age and minutes on good teams. If you're playing, if you're 18 and you're playing for Manchester City, you're pretty good. If you're 18 and playing for PSG, you're pretty good. If you're 29 and playing in the 4th division of Albania, you're probably not worth looking at. So it's one of these things where it's fairly obvious, like, what the good players look like, and then you're looking for like which players are being undervalued in the market, and that's where you can add value to clubs. And then you've got niches in data. So like a lot of what I see is basically just new companies creating a rehashed version of what's already there. It's not really like a unique thing. So data providers who gather different data, that's really useful. Like the first job I did in football was 3 months of just watching goalkeepers, like every day on Y-Scout, 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, just what was the quality of the action. And that's what I call within clubs, probably kind of the data gathering stages. We've got data profiles, that's identify good players. Then you need to watch them really closely. And that's almost like quality grading of the action. So we know the quantity of the action, we know the success, yes or no. We don't know if there's an extra quality layer you can add into that. So was it a really safe handling, or was it a save, but he actually pushed the ball straight back into the central areas? So again, building your own data sets, that's probably a niche that more people should look at. And then you will always have in-housing. So in American sports, they will have a team of 50 analysts at the kind of the high-end level. There's very few clubs in the UK or worldwide, I think, who've got their own big analytics service. I think the reason for that is that most clubs don't use the analytics services, tools and products they already have. Like very few people are actually using them for decision making. Even now, with the availability of them, they're still not used hugely. So I think clubs are looking at, should we have an in-house team? Should we create our own IP? And the question we always have is like, is it better for us to develop a tool and then sell that tool to other people? Or is it better for us to, because we believe that tool is really good at identifying players, is it better to sell that tool to 15, 20 clubs for a couple of £1,000s a month? Or is it better to keep that IP and give it to one club and use that to sign players and make millions through the additional, like, if you completely replicate Brighton's ability to generate transfer profits, why would I sell that to everyone on the market rather than keep that information and use it? So I think I see the trend of consultants like us is work with fewer clubs, but at a deeper level with more influence. And then, I just think what the market wants is not necessarily what is valuable. So what the market wants is a single player score. They want a FIFA ranking for every player. Here's a 93, he's better than him, is an 89. To me, and to lots of people I speak to work heavily with data, I think the more you simplify it and make it user-friendly, the less useful it is. Because just an example, you've got a basket of 10 metrics that are equally weighted, and a player is scoring 50. Now he could be 10 metrics at 50, or he could be 5 at 100 and 5 at 0, and he'd get the same score in most single score systems. That's how they work. So to me, you want the nuance is where you make your is where you actually generate the value. And the more mass market products that are just a ranking, the less useful that information is, and the less the analytics as a concept is adopted properly and becomes more of a kind of FIFA ranking system rather than a slightly fuzzy area that points you in the right direction, which is what I think it actually is. and your value is how you interpret and use that information.
Yeah, nice, nice. One final thing, Tim, because I know we're approaching the hour mark now. So I wanted to ask you for some advice as well for aspiring analysts. So one thing, well, a sponsor of this video is APFA, the Association of Professional Football Analysts. I think you are part of the advisor there. You kind of help those guys out as well. And I know you've been vocal on Twitter about kind of how people can get into the industry, whether it be Market Insights are looking to hire people, or just in general. What advice would you give for someone looking to break into football analytics?
It's definitely produce content. Like you might be the best scout in the world, you might be the best analyst in the world, but if you just keep that information in your head, or you only ever write it on job applications, you're not going to get a job. Like I always said to people, like if you're right for this job, you don't have to worry about running out of ideas. Like you'll have ideas all the time. Like when I broke into this industry, it was through blogging, and I would often write a blog almost every day. Like my head was just full of ideas about football, and I would write them down. And I never worried I was going to run out of things, or I was giving away value. And a lot of people said to me, like clubs even were like, you're giving away like names here, you're giving away players, you're giving away value. But I was always like, but I'm not worried that I'm going to run out of. There's always new players. There's always new ideas. There's always ways you can think about these things. And if you're generating useful ideas, then you're useful to clubs, and you need to start sharing those. And we've recruited maybe 8, 9, 10 people over the last 5 years, and every one of those has come from a blogging, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever platform. But have your own, but make sure you find a way that you can gather that together. So it might be a bit old fashioned, but a blog where you can just look back and say, these were my ideas. Here's a date stamp. Here's the players I was picking out. Here's the trends I was picking up on that are now mainstream. And then it's a bit of self-promotion, which no one likes doing. But I think it is the kind of retweeting yourself from 3 years ago saying, oh, look, here's the 10 players I said were good in League Two in France, and here they are now. And clubs look at that. Like the biggest thing you can do is build up a chronology of your work and your ideas. So you're not just jumping on the bandwagon, you're a thought leader, or whatever cringeworthy phrase you want to call it, but something like that, where you're putting out information into the public. It's being picked up. Clubs will read it. It'll be shared on their internal Slack channels. Oh, this guy's good. We do it all the time. Clubs do it all the time. I ask us about people on Twitter. Are they any good? What are their ideas like? Do you rate them? Should we employ them? And that's how they're recruiting increasingly. So share content and don't worry about running out of ideas, because you will be copied. Like as soon as you put something out, someone will copy it. But you've got the evidence, the timestamped blog, the tweet that you were first. Then that's what counts.
Yeah, definitely. No, good advice. Perfect. So, appreciate that, Tim. Thanks very much for your time. I'm going to link your Twitter down below. I'll link Market Insights underneath the video. Anything else you want to give a shout out to while you're on? Anything at all?
No, I mean, you asked about any recommended podcasts or books.
Yes, indeed.
I always recommend Not the Top 20. I always think it's the best way of learning about English football, particularly exclusively low league football. But I think it's just like people who know what they're talking about and are kind of in tune with the way that football's going. So I'd always recommend Not the Top 20.
Any books? Are you a reader or?
Yes, I do. Like the foundational texts of football, Numbers Game is the one that I always like, and Soccernomics was another one. And then just a completely non-football one. There's a kind of an American guy who writes about education, which was kind of a big passion of mine as well, called Alfie Kohn, and he's just someone who really challenges thinking. He's kind of famous for asking for like evidence behind the way people have always done things. So, for example, homework in schools is like everyone just assumes you get homework, you do homework, you give it in. He's always like, why? Like, is there any actual benefit? And he's kind of goes really deep into like challenging the fundamental things. And I think that's just working in football. That's an important thing to do, is don't just accept this is the way we scout because we've always done it. There's no evidence for a lot of stuff we do in this sport. No evidence at all. Yeah. So I think having the confidence to challenge things is important in any industry if you're going to succeed.
Definitely. Nice. I'll link that down below as well. So yes, Tim, thanks very much for your time. You take care, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.